Recently, the final installment of the Neon Genesis Evangelion Rebuild series of movies was released, and closed off a decade-spanning story that stands out uniquely in the anime that goes totally bananas genre. Yes, that's a genre, and not something I totally made up just now. If you're not familiar with Neon Genesis Evangelion, or Evangelion for short, since the full title is a mouthful, then I highly encourage you to make the trek through the series yourself, starting with the original anime run, End of Evangelion, and the Rebuild series of films. It's a long watch, but it's a journey very much worth going on. Be prepared for a lot of intentionally quiet, long, drawn-out moments, meant to unsettle or force us to sit with our thoughts. Also, be ready for a lot of awful, horrifying moments, especially when you know that the main combatants are children. They're 14, 15 years old. This series doesn't pull its punches, and the social commentary is front and center. Also, be ready to not be able to fully understand what's going on, especially in the lattermost 2 episodes of the anime. It makes sense over time, but there's a reason for the ambiguity, a reason for some of it being incomprehensible at times. Look, the whole show could fuel symbolism and lore for decades, it's so dense and rich with both. But there's a reason this series is so important to so many fans of the show. It gets to the heart of things we're sometimes afraid to confront in ourselves. So yeah, strap in, folks. Today on Symbolism and Lore, I'm talking about Neon Genesis Evangelion. Wait, not the entire thing! Come back! So, if it's not obvious by now, this entire video is going to come with massive spoilers, both for the entire series and especially for the most recent release. If you haven't watched the series or the Rebuild movies, and spoilers are something that bother you, then you're gonna need to come back to this once you've had a chance to make your way through the archive. This is going to be your only warning to turn back if you don't want to be spoiled. In addition, when I say that this series gets dark, I don't just mean gore, violence, or even just sheer horror. I mean it's something that absolutely will touch on experiences related to trauma of all kinds. Literally one of the most persistent themes in the entire run of Evangelion is trauma. This series runs the gamut of dark subjects, including dissociation and doubt in reality itself. So if you're vulnerable to discussion of topics around mental health, abuse, neglect, depression, and the like, you might either want to skip this video or to come back to it when you're feeling braced against a potential trigger. That's a whole lot of disclaimers, and believe me, they're necessary. So, with all that out of the way, I want to tackle a specific slice of Evangelion, Shinji's relationship with his father, Gendo. In a world of monsters and constant danger, in a post-apocalyptic nightmare of people trying to cope with a disaster that consumed the planet, the story actually starts with a son arriving in town, having been sent away by his own father, only to be called back now. And the entirety of the series is about these 2 figures in particular, although every character has a part in everything that happens. Brief plot rundown. The world as we know it has come to an end from something called the Second Impact, a massive catastrophic event that unleashed creatures known as angels on the Earth, seeking to punish humanity. And we're not talking pretty winged people, but giant monstrosities that only get more abstract as the series goes on. So, much more of the classic angel here. The organization NERV, headed by Gendo Ikari, fights back against these angels with military force and specially designed pilotable giant robots that are called Evas, mechs grown from tissue attached with the angels, and humanity's best bet for fighting them off. But these mechs can only be operated by children born after the Second Impact event, kids younger than 15 years old. They're the only ones with the compatibility to sync with these Evas and operate them, and Gendo has recruited his own son, Shinji, to be a pilot for Eva Unit 1, a unique Eva, especially because it houses the soul of his dead mother. I warned you about spoilers, dog. Gendo is one of those chess master types, the man always in control, running NERV ostensibly to fight the Angels, and yet working towards his own agenda, wanting to bring about what is referred to as the Human Instrumentality Project, or the forced evolution of humanity by bringing about a third impact, one that removes all separation of consciousness and merges everyone into a collective, borderless mass of souls. Why? Because he wants to reunite with his dead wife. Gendo is obsessed with bringing about human instrumentality, losing sight of anything but achieving that goal. He staples his hands in front of his face and watches dispassionately as NERV fights the onslaught of Angels. He sits at a distance from everyone, a role that we learn in this last movie he has always filled. And that includes his own son, Shinji. After years of having abandoned Shinji in pursuit of his own goals, Gendo pulls him back to Tokyo 3. But not for any type of familial reunion. No, he tells Shinji to get in the robot and arranges for isolated quarters for his son, continuing to keep Shinji at arm's length, close enough to manipulate, but never close enough to emotionally connect. Appalled at this, Captain Misato Katsuragi, operations director at NERV, takes Shinji in and ends up becoming the major parental figure in Shinji's life. But because she was terrible at taking care of herself, she was not prepared for taking care of Shinji either, and ended up failing him horribly. Now, a major theme of the series is that just about everyone is a deeply flawed but still sympathetic person, often working through their own trauma and making mistakes along the way. So, I want to say my comments on Misato's ability to take care of Shinji is not a condemnation of her as a whole, only that she wasn't able to provide the support that he needed because of everything she was going through. No one has a good coping mechanism in this series. Not a single one. She flirts with him and then chastises him for not being man enough. She clearly cares for him a great deal, but often yells at Shinji for his mistakes, tearing him down repeatedly. And because she holds on to childish behavior into adulthood, she sets a terrible example and even ends up taking advantage of him several times. And in a situation like this, having lived on his own for so long, and then having to be the one to make up for Misato's childish behavior, Shinji is forced into a common role that neglected children take, being the responsible one. He has anxiety about whether or not he's letting the people around him down, or whether they'll abandon him as soon as he stops being useful to them. The series unfolds with the parental figures in Shinji's life either being absent, neglectful, or highly inappropriate and crossing boundaries. This escalates as the main series itself comes to a close, ending with Shinji begging for love and seeking intimacy, and having turned that anger and hurt outward, and even rejecting his own humanity. I could do a whole series on just the last 2 episodes of the anime series alone, so let's just put a pin in that for later, alright? That's a lot. Shinji loses himself. Gendo's plans come undone when he is killed before being able to reunite with his dead wife, and it was a major controversy that the last few episodes offered no solid closure to the events of the rest of the series. A lot of viewers felt unsatisfied and confused, because Shinji's last moments of the series are the reflection of someone choosing to find their own happiness, and finding the love and intimacy they need within themselves, despite the horrific experiences of their life. And then End of Evangelion happened, and oh, what the fuck is happening? Please go back to the abstract psychological shit! The Rebuild series of movies, taking place in a different timeline, starts off covering a lot of the same ground of the original series, with a few things tweaked and some subtle differences that sort of multiply over time. Asuka is far more tempered now, no longer draping herself over Kaji. Misato seems to have matured and started taking her role as a guardian far more seriously, and Shinji finds himself getting words of praise more often. Encouraged, Shinji manages to overcome even more difficult battles than he had in the series proper. He has confidence in himself and pulls off even greater stunts than before. The stakes all around seem raised, and Shinji comes into himself as a person with support and at least some modicum of kindness, and brings about the third impact even earlier than it does in the series. Wait, what the fuck?! So, here's the thing. How many times have you mentally gone over something that went wrong in your life and wished you could redo it, knowing what you know now? If only I told her the truth that time, she wouldn't have gotten so angry at me. Or, I wish I'd asked him out when I had the chance, or something like that. This is just a personal interpretation, and the series as a whole really leaves itself open to that. But I'm pretty sure that the Rebuild movies are Shinji trying to do exactly that after things went so bad in the last timeline. There are signs that this is all, in fact, part of one timeline, with a world that got remade by Shinji in the wake of how things ended the last time. Things like the personality changes, the water being red now, the fact that Gendo seems to know everything before it happens, and whoops, it gets explicitly stated in the last film. The interpretation part is that Shinji was trying to make things right, to form better connections with people around him, to make up for how helpless he felt before, and maybe have a better chance at finding that emotional intimacy he still craved. But, notice something about the names of the Rebuild movies? Names with parentheses that imply two different contradictory titles? Look, You Are Not Alone, where Shinji gets the answers for the question he asked at the end of the anime. Why does he feel so alone? He is alone, in many ways, still isolated from his father, but simultaneously, he is no longer alone in the fight. You can not advance, you can not redo. They capture Shinji's hope that he can advance and redo things, and the reality of the situation he is in. You can't redo reality. You can't remake the events and do them better. Any attempts to try inevitably lead you back to where you started, because no matter how many times you reimagine events in your head, you can't remove the mark that trauma has left on you. Shinji's neglect and abuse at the hands of his father will never heal from him trying to fix the past events, because they've already happened. And because he hasn't found a way to deal with it, his actions continue to hurt both himself and the people around him. There's only one way to truly address everything that happened to him. He needs to do the one thing he's been terrified of this entire time. He needs to confront his father. And now we're back to the final installment of the Rebuild set of movies, the one that released this year, the one that closed everything off with a very neat little bow and gave us all the genuine closure that Shinji deserved and that the audience craved ever since the original series ended. The movie takes its time to give Shinji space to heal. He's just undergone the worst trauma of the entirety of Evangelion, and that's saying a lot. And if there's any doubt that this series is a metaphor for trauma, the sight of Shinji sitting motionless for days, refusing to eat or function, having shut down completely should make that clear. But he has shown small kindnesses, small comforts, signs that even his most destructive choices didn't destroy everything. Like seeing his former classmates having settled into a happy, contented life together, and everyone showing him patience and understanding. The tenderness he needed and was denied. That even people who should blame him for the struggles they face now show him. He knows unconditional love. He is challenged to think about what led him to his harmful, destructive decisions, and finally figures out that he needs to stay away from the vehicle of his father's praise, the Evas. He needs to stop trying to win his love and praise. He needs to let others take the reins and sit with himself. And because he does all of that, when the time comes for him to finally confront his father, he does. At first, he unleashes all of his anger, fighting him and trying to beat him down to stop him once and for all. But he realizes, with Gendo's own suggestion that fighting won't change anything, that the confrontation would have to be a verbal one. And in that moment, when he approaches his father with sincerity, with due but tempered anger, he finally learns the truth. His father is afraid of him. In fact, he's afraid of Shinji in a way he feared no one else. In fact, he is afraid of being rejected by Shinji. Gendo realizes this fear, having not even realized that it had been his fear. And, Gendo explains, his whole life was one of isolation, of shutting everyone else out. Yui, his wife and Shinji's mother, had been the one exception, and losing her destroyed him. He felt it was his own weakness that caused Yui's death, and that he needed to punish himself for this weakness. Cutting Shinji out of his life, not being able to be his father, stowing him where Gendo could never see the last part of Yui he had left in the world, that was his punishment. But he realizes, as his son finally confronts him as an adult, that he wasn't only punishing himself. He was denying Shinji the only thing he ever really wanted, his father. And he was only pushing Yui, whom he desperately sought to reunite with, away along with him. He finally sees Shinji and recognizes Yui in him. He turns back to his son, grips him in a tight hug, and says, "I'm sorry." He doesn't ask for forgiveness. He just says, "I'm sorry." The one thing he was never able to say for the entire show, for the entire run of movies, because his pride and fear of his own weakness drove him away from all that he loved. Before now, he wasn't able to say it, because his fear response, the AT field he didn't even realize he still had, blocked him from truly connecting with others. Having found his path back to Yui, having made his apology to Shinji with no expectations except to acknowledge the wrong he'd done his own son, Gendo goes on to finally make amends by him. He protects Shinji one last time by sparing him having to fix the problem that Gendo created, thrusting him out of the Eva as he and Yui complete the task of helping Shinji make it to his new life, one away from all that his trauma had wrought. That one apology was the last piece that Shinji needed to finally start growing past his trauma. Because his father showed himself to be just as human as Shinji was, and apologized for his mistakes, Shinji was able to have closure, and we see him, as an adult, with an edge of confidence that his younger self could never muster. No longer does he need to try and repeat the timeline. No longer is he stuck as a teenager forever reliving the worst moments of his life. No longer does he base his life around the praise he wanted from a father who had denied him affection. The ability to say that you're sorry, a genuine sorry, and not just a scripted one, is more rare than I think we often realize. We can say, "I'm sorry," when we see the negative impact our choices and actions have on others, but it's not always an admission of our responsibility in it. Sometimes it's said reflexively, as an acknowledgement that something went wrong, but not necessarily an admission that we did something wrong. Because being the one in the wrong is hard to deal with. Being able to see that you made a mistake, and to truly commit to apologizing to the ones wronged by us, is sort of a muscle that needs flexing. But it can make you stronger to do so. Seeing all of who you are, the good and the bad, and being able to accept it and move forward is important to loving yourself. Punishing yourself by withdrawing from others helps no one. Avoiding people because you're afraid of hurting them will only do more harm. Hiding the parts of you that you don't like only deepens your pride and fear of being seen for the mess you are. Being able to say, "I'm sorry," means seeing the whole of yourself and not giving up because of where you might have gone wrong. It means you give yourself permission to finally move on. And that's really the only way to end a terrible loop of your mistakes, once and for all.